I think where it gets home to us is we can often walk around feeling like we have a lot of brokenness, like we have a lot of shame. We can be in environments where we feel like outsiders, and yet God includes these four women in the genealogy in Matthew, and Matthew includes them to show that God's heart is exactly for those types of people, which at the end of the day is all of us. We're all outsiders to a certain extent. We all have brokenness in our lives. We all make a mess of our situations at times, and God works through that to bring about life. And that's what he did in Jesus. Welcome to the Four Leg Norman podcast. We're so glad you've tuned in for today's episode. And we're going to be talking about how God works through our mess and our brokenness to bring about goodness, to bring about life, and how his grace goes after those who are vulnerable, who are marginalized, who may be viewed as outsiders. And we hope that what our discussion goes into and dives into today speaks to you where you're at, and we hope you receive encouragement and that you're uplifted from it. Before we get into today's episode, if you're enjoying these conversations each week, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button right here on YouTube. It's quick, it's free, and it makes a huge difference in helping our podcast reach more people in the Lake Norman community. Thank you for supporting the Four Lake Norman podcast. Now let's tune into today's episode. Well, we are kicking off a new sermon series at our church. We just wrapped up the 107 series, and we hope everyone enjoyed their Thanksgiving holiday and were able to communicate a lot of things you're grateful for, including the biblical theme of redemption, which we've become well accustomed to over the past month or so. And so now we're stepping into our Advent series, which is looking ahead to celebrating the coming of Jesus and his birth. And so we're going to be in the first four chapters of Matthew, which is one of the gospel accounts in scripture. So one of the accounts of the life of Jesus. And we kicked off this week with the genealogy at the beginning, which if you haven't read the Bible much or you're not familiar with the Bible, this is probably the most boring part of scripture for you to read.
Long list of names.
Just a long list of names that you can't pronounce, that you don't recognize, and you don't know anything about these people. And so it could be really boring.
Until today.
That's right. We're going to show why it's interesting and why it matters. There's actually a lot there. And it's unlike how we would probably structure genealogies today, right? If you go do like, 23andMe? Is that the
the
most
chromosomes.
popular? Yeah, the chromosomes.
Yeah.
You're mapping out your family tree. You're not going to leave anybody out. You're probably going to have everyone included, and you're going to try and gather as many stories as you can to each person's name. Well, what Matthew's doing, we're not trying to tell a story when we get a family tree, at least for most people. I don't feel like we are, unless it's like a school project.
Trying to understand our own story.
We're trying to understand, we're trying to understand like where we come from, what our lineage is, like what our ethnic makeup is. Like, some people were like, oh, I'm Irish, I'm German. I don't really know because I've never done the whole family tree lineage thing. But what Matthew's doing is he's trying to take us on a journey through a story by the names that he's listed, because he actually doesn't include every name that takes you from Abraham all the way to Jesus. He leaves out a lot. There's sections he leaves out if you compare them with other genealogies in scripture. And so it's all intentional, the way that he's structured and shaped it. And we talked about that on Sunday in the sermon about he structures it based on giving Jesus three titles. So son of Abraham, son of David, Messiah. And each section of the genealogy kind of culminates in those three titles because he splits it up into three sections.
And this was a special week because you preached the sermon on this one.
It was different.
So, I heard it twice. Well done.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. It was a fun one. And I enjoy getting to dive into the passages like that, where you got to really do some digging to get the richness out of it.
Yeah, you didn't get the softball.
I did not get the softball, which is fine by me. But yeah, so Jesus as son of Abraham, son of David, and Messiah. Messiah is a Hebrew word for king. He's the long anticipated king that was promised to the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel is connected to Abraham because God promised Abraham, through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And God chose to work through this family to bring about his blessing to all people. And so Matthew wants to connect him to being a descendant of Abraham. And then he connects him also to David because David is probably the most well-known king in Israel's history. When he came on the scene, a lot of people anticipated that he was the Messiah or was going to be the Messiah that would defeat evil, set things right. And it turns out that David was just as evil as the rest of Israel and the rest of their kings up to that point, and the kings after him continue in that. And so it creates this um, it creates this situation where Babylon actually comes in and takes over Israel, takes them into exile, and they have no king anymore because they're living in exile. And then you have all these prophets come on the scene that are saying the king that was promised is still going to come, and he's still going to defeat the snake. He's going to defeat evil, and make all things right. And that's where you get to Jesus as the Messiah. And so pretty much what Matthew's doing in his genealogy is he's summing up the entire Old Testament and the entire story of Israel and saying Jesus is the fulfillment of it. And that's where we honed in on Sunday. But what I didn't have time to talk about is I briefly mentioned it, but he includes, I guess there's 5 women in this genealogy, but 4 in particular that it's very peculiar why he would include them in a patriarchal genealogy, because at that time you just didn't include women in genealogies. It was all about the fathers that you would include in the list. And so the fact that he's including women at all is peculiar, but when you dive into these 4 women's stories, it's even more peculiar. And so what I wanted to do for today's episode is dive into their stories a little bit and see what we have to learn from that. So the 4 women are Tamar, which is connected to Judah in Genesis 38. And then you have Rahab in Joshua chapter 2 and chapter 6. Then you have the book of Ruth. Ruth is a name mentioned in the genealogy. And then you have Bathsheba, who is connected to David. I want to kind of summarize each woman's story. We won't be able to dive into each of them to do them justice, but each of them is quite a story if you dive into it. So you actually, back during the summer in our In Case You Missed It series, in the story of Joseph, really honed in on the story of Judah and Tamar. So would you like to summarize the story of Tamar to the best of your ability?
Yeah. So in the summertime, when we were doing the top 10 Bible stories series, In Case You Missed It, I was just going to skip the chapter because we were doing the story of Joseph, which starts in Genesis 37, goes all the way through Genesis 50. But it's very strange how the story starts off in Genesis, because you have the beginnings of the Joseph story and the multicolored coat and all the things. And then you have chapter 38, which like skips over to Judah and the story of Tamar. And then it comes back to Joseph in 39 and on the rest of the way. So I thought maybe we'll just skip 38 and stick with the Joseph story. But the more I dug into the story of Joseph, of the 12 brothers who would become the 12 tribes of Israel, the story of Genesis, and ultimately really the story of the Bible, the more that chapter 38 about Judah and Tamar is like, it's not just a mistake that's there or a random
like a
thing.
Side note.
It's not just a little parentheses.
Right.
Like, it's very intentional. So yeah, Judah is one of the brothers, right? One of the sons of Jacob. I think he's the 4th one in line, which is interesting because he's not the firstborn. So typically in the patriarchal societies, the line would pass through the firstborn. He's also not the most righteous or the favored son, which was Joseph, who was number 11. So you got Judah somewhere in the middle, but he becomes the one through whom the Abrahamic promise flows. How that happened is just bizarre. So, at some point in their young adulthood, you read in the beginning of Genesis 38 that Judah leaves the rest of the family and goes with a friend of his in kind of a pagan nation and starts hanging out with Yeah, I made a joke in the sermon series, like, the bully kid down the street, he's hanging out with the rough crowd, and he winds up marrying a woman from this neighboring, pagan nation, has 3 sons. His oldest one marries a woman named Tamar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then the son is wicked in God's eyes and he dies. So Tamar is this widow. And so Judah promises that, she could marry the next in line, which is the way that it worked, and actually kind of foreshadows the Ruth story. So when a husband died, then it was the brother or the nearest of kin who had the responsibility to marry the widow so that the line could be continued of the older brother. But brother number 2, he didn't want anything to do with it. So God didn't like that either. So God killed him. And so now here you have Tamar, who's kind of twice a widow. And the third son of Judah is much younger. He's like little brother. He's not old enough to marry yet. So he says, when he gets older, you can marry him. So Tamar's just this widow in waiting to marry the third son to, pass along the seed of Judah and his oldest son. Along the way, Judah's wife dies, so now he's a widower. And Tamar has this idea, and you don't know where it doesn't tell you in the Bible where it came from, but she decides she's going to take matters into her own hand, because after a long, long time, little brother, she realizes, okay, Judah's not fulfilling the promise. She's not going to marry little brother. Her role as the carrier of the line is just gonna, go nowhere.
And in fairness to Judah, he's probably thinking, okay, she married one, he died. She's given to another, he dies. Now
I got one son left.
Looking at her as okay, this is not a good trend that's being set here.
And who knows? The superstitions of the day,
right?
100% that could have been taboo.
Yeah,
didn't even think about that.
Yeah. But if it was happening in your family, you would be like, okay, maybe this is not a good idea.
Maybe she's a curse, 3.
And I think for us, we don't understand the severity of the situation Tamar's in, because we weren't, we're very unfamiliar with the cultural context in which this was taking place.
Mm-hmm.
And this will come up when we talk about Ruth as well. But to not be able to continue a family line, carrying on family lineage, apart from that, in this patriarchal society, women had zero security,
right,
and zero provision if they weren't fulfilling the responsibility to be fruitful and multiply. And that was just how it was viewed. Right, wrong,
right,
indifferent.
Yeah. So glad
that's the cultural context, and I'm glad we've moved past that.
Yeah, well, and that Jesus came along and changed so many of these societal norms for women. Jesus came along and honored women in a way that had never been done. So the Messiah comes along and rights a lot of these historical wrongs. So either way, here's Tamar, who, as the wife of the firstborn, potentially had a very important role, secure, financial security, all the things.
Yeah.
But's just waiting in the wings. So what she decides to do about it is disguise herself as a prostitute, sit by the city gate where she knows that Judah, her father-in-law, is going to be passing by, who is now a widower. Mm-hmm. Now, what does she know about Judah? That's an interesting one, that she assumes if I go and disguise myself as a prostitute, he's going to want to sleep with me, which doesn't speak very well about Judah.
No, it does not.
Maybe he had a habit that she knew about and that she could take advantage of. And so sure enough, Judah passes by. He sees this woman who he assumes to be a prostitute, solicits her services, and she says, "What are you going to give me in return?" There's this exchange of, well, I'll give you a young goat from my flock. Well, how do I know you're going to come back and give it to me? So essentially she asks him for a deposit of his family seal, and there was a cord with the family seal and his staff. So things that would have identified Judah, right? Very clearly.
I saw one podcast where they said, give me your credit card, your keys, and your license. That's basically what she's asking for in our terms.
Yeah.
So,
your identity markers.
Give me all these things.
So and he does. And even there, just the foolishness of Judah is on full display here in this story. just at every turn, from leaving the family and going to the rough side of, to hang out with the bullies down the block, to every decision elsewhere. There's just not a redeeming decision that Judah makes in this chapter. And so it just kind of gets spirals, from bad to worse. So she gets pregnant, and then, there's some details in the middle there of him coming back and asking, where's this prostitute? Or he sent his friend with the goat, and everybody's like, there was never a prostitute here. We don't know what you're talking about, because, she kind of came and went. And so there's some intrigue there. But the important part of the story is that she turns up pregnant with Judah's child. Word gets back to Judah that, hey, your widowed daughter-in-law is now pregnant, and we don't know who, the husband, the father is. And so Judah's response is, well, drag her out and put her to death. And then when she gets dragged out, she says, well, the father is the owner of these items, the family seal and the cord and the staff. Well, now Judah's exposed, and he's shamed. And he says that the one sort of redemptive statement that Judah makes is, she is more righteous than I. And so there's the first hint of humility and repentance and contrition on Judah's part. And we don't get much. It's just a little kind of a hint. And Judah's, of course, the one who ultimately, he's in the line as well. And then it gets even more. So she has twins. And in the birthing process, one of the two boys, sticks his arm out, and the midwife says, well, we need to identify him as the firstborn. So she ties a red string around his wrist. Well, instead of the rest of him coming on out, he pulls his arm back in, and the other one comes out first. And so the other is the one who sort of jumped in line ahead of, so there's, Perez and Zerah. And so the child who was not the rightful firstborn actually winds up being the one, I think it's Perez, who carries on the family line, which is strangely reminiscent of Jacob and Esau.
That's what I was thinking.
So Jacob, who is the younger of the twins, he's the one that gets the line. And so through this bizarre story, right? Tamar earns a spot in the genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. She's spoken of as at least more righteous than Judah in the direct, immediate context. And in the light of history and sort of in God's providence, like, there's no condemnation of Tamar. Like, there's nothing that says, which is interesting in all of these stories, especially Rahab, she's not corrected for anything. She just earns her place in the story, which, I think there's a lot we could say about. There are a lot of instances in this story, Judah being one, his father Jacob being another. Jacob, his name means deceiver. He was a liar and a cheat. He stole the birthright. So this genealogy is littered with brokenness and outright willful evil. And yet God redeems over and over and over again. And I think, not to jump to the punchline, but I think to foreshadow some of the significance of this is that, God's not redeeming the most righteous, best, and brightest. I mean, Jesus came along and said, it's the sick who need a physician, not those who are well. So God is breaking into history to redeem the sick and brokenness of humanity. And it's on like full display in the line from which the Messiah came. So Tamar, she's it's a pretty standout story. It's wild. Genesis 38. If you want to read a chapter that you go, I can't believe this is in the Bible. That's one of them.
Yeah.
And that's where, if you just read it at face value and you're thinking in our context, you're like, why on earth would Tamar do such a thing? But I don't think we realize just how vulnerable of a position she was in. She's vulnerable, overlooked. And what God shows us in that passage is that those are the exact people that he cares for.
Yeah.
And he exposes injustice in that situation and dignifies those who have been marginalized.
Yeah.
And that's, we see that theme throughout the rest of Matthew's gospel account, is Jesus is going to do that with many people that he encounters, is he's going to dignify the marginalized.
Yeah.
So what Matthew is going to great pains to try to do to show us in this genealogy is that what Jesus is about to do in the account as he continues and tells all these stories is not anything different from what God's been doing through all of history so far.
Yes.
And he's the fulfillment of it. And so you go on to, we'll probably have to fly through the rest of
sorry,
these
Tamar's
stories.
a juicy one.
But Tamar is probably the most
at least the most unexpected.
Yes.
Yeah.
People know about Rahab. People know about Ruth.
Right.
I mean, at least more so they know about Bathsheba.
Yeah.
Tamar's the one that's like, who?
It's a blip in the radar in the whole story of Genesis.
Yeah, and not for nothing. The cycle of brokenness that was experienced throughout that family, I think also speaks to people who think, well, God couldn't use me. You know, it just seems like a repeated cycle for some family lines. And what I look at in that story too is for people who do experience that, you know, Jesus is the answer. You see how he uses these stories and then he changes that cycle. So somebody's got to be the one. And so to think that God can't use you to break a cycle of brokenness within your own family through generations of trials and tribulations is, this story proves that wrong.
Yeah.
So,
and that's so relevant. I think there's so many families and individuals in every generation, but certainly in our generation, who exactly, you're right. I mean, their parents, their grandparents, it's just generations of brokenness.
Yeah.
And the natural instinctive response to that may well be, well, there's no hope for me.
Right.
There's no hope for my family.
Correct.
But God can, through the power of the Messiah, Jesus, the redemptive power of the gospel, use women, men, children to change the family line.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Sorry, I had to tag that.
Yeah,
I was thinking about it through there. Yeah.
I'm glad you did say that. So Rahab is the next story in the book of Joshua.
Yeah.
It comes around the story of the walls of Jericho, which a lot of people are familiar with. And she was a Canaanite prostitute who was living in the city of Jericho. And Joshua sends these spies to go scout out Jericho, see what Israel's going to be up against, because God's promised them this land. And so they're going to scout it out to see, okay, what do we have to do to take this land that God has promised us? And they find their way. It doesn't really say why they go to her place specifically, but they find their way into Rahab's living space. And they're hiding from the king's men in the town of Jericho so that they don't get killed for spying. She hides them, lies to the authorities, and risked her life. Like, if they would have found out, she would have for sure been killed, like without a question. And she also has this moment where she confesses faith in Israel's God, even though she doesn't know. Assume it, if you assume, she probably doesn't know a lot about Israel's God, but she confesses faith in him. And she says that he's the only God who rules heaven and earth, which is an interesting
statement of faith.
Yeah.
Also indicative of the fact that she's watching other Christians and she wants to be a part of what they are experiencing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, if you read the context there, the nations, like the people in the city of Jericho, they had caught wind of what had just happened, which was God parting the Jordan River and leading these people through. I mean, that just happened a few miles away. And so they had just heard about this miraculous event.
Yeah.
And they were terrified of the Israelites coming in. So that's why they were like, they shut the gates, shut the walls. Everybody in Jericho was all like locked in tight.
Yeah.
And so it was opportunistic on Rahab's part.
Right.
To house these spies, because in her mind, I don't know what she knew about Israel's God, but they were like, oh, there's something real about that nation's God. Like, they all have their gods, like the small g gods, but They didn't see things like Israel's God performed.
Yeah. And so the story goes on. It says that the spies promise her and her family protection because of what she had done for them. When Jericho fell, Rahab and her family are spared. They're preserved. And there's some interesting like archaeological stuff you can look into about the walls of Jericho, and like the one section that Rahab presumably lived in is the only one that remains standing. But we don't have to get into all that. Then she later married a guy named Salmon because Salmon and Rahab became the mother of Boaz, which gets us to the story of Ruth.
Yeah. Next generation.
And both are included in the genealogy of Jesus. And so this radical faith in God from an outsider, from a Canaanite, redeems anyone who trusts in him, is kind of the message that story is giving. Anyone who puts their trust in the God of heaven and earth, which for the Israelites is Yahweh and would come as the Messiah Jesus, is rescued from impending death, regardless of their past, regardless of what they do for their line of work, no matter how unjust or wrong it may be. Their trust in God, their declaration of faith in God, wipes away all that and gives them life. And so that's kind of the theme of the story of Rahab. And as we said, Boaz kind of teases the story of Ruth. So you go to story of Ruth. She's a Moabite woman. She's been widowed, and her mother-in-law Naomi has this plot of land in Israel, but because of a famine, they leave, and then they come back, and Rahab. I'm going to get the R names mixed up.
Yeah,
Ruth has this powerful moment where she shows this incredible amount of loving kindness and loyalty to Naomi. She says, "Wherever you will go, I will go. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people." And so she has pledged her loyalty to Naomi. And so just to fast forward in the story, she goes out and gleans in the fields to provide for her and Naomi to make sure that they can survive. And that's where Ruth catches the attention of Boaz, who is the owner of those fields. And he, tells him to give her all the grain she could carry, and shows this kindness towards her because he recognizes something in her. So Naomi, the whole story is just in an incredibly bad mood because she thinks the story's over for them. Like, the line is done. They don't have any land to go back to because you have to have a husband marry into your family to keep the line going in order for you to inherit this land. It's called a kinsman redeemer. So both are widows. Unless someone in the extended family marries them, that land is forfeited and it would be sold to somebody else. And at that time, if you don't have land and you don't have a husband, you're probably going to die because you have no way to provide for yourself. You have no way to dig your way out of that situation. And so Naomi's in a bad mood the whole time, but Ruth just shows an incredible amount of character and throughout the whole story. And there's this moment where Naomi says, "Hey, Boaz is kin. You should go talk to him and see if he will take you as his wife." And so there's this weird rendezvous at night after this big festival and party. And she goes to Boaz, and Boaz does an honorable thing. And then they realize that there's another kinsman who actually has the first right to take Ruth as his wife. Boaz goes and has a conversation with him and says, "Hey, if you want this land, you would also have to take Ruth as your wife." And he says, "Well, I don't want to mess up my estate, so I'm going to forfeit it." And so Boaz is the one who is the kinsman redeemer in that story.
The fun part of that story is he hands him his shoe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was the sign of like relinquishing the right to first refusal.
Yeah.
Here's a shoe. Here's my left sandal.
Yeah.
Go ahead and take
You
it.
can keep it. I don't need it.
So Boaz marrying Ruth restores Naomi's family line. Ruth becomes the great-grandmother of King David. Some of the themes in this story is just the loyalty she showed, sacrificial love that not only Boaz showed, but also Ruth showed towards Naomi, and God weaving redemption out of loss. Naomi truly thought that their story was over, that they were in a desperate situation. She didn't see any way out, and yet God worked through Ruth and Boaz to give Naomi hope and to keep her story going.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing out, Tucker, just the destitute situation that these women in particular would have been in, because I think there are a number of men in this story who, like we mentioned, Jacob, Judah, who were scoundrels and not deserving of redemption, certainly. But they wouldn't have been in the vulnerable position that the women would have been in particular. And I do think that brings out something of the gospel of the vulnerable position that we all are in without a Messiah, that I think is probably more vividly displayed in the situations of these women in that time in history. And then fast forward to Jesus elevating women and bringing particular redemption to women in his ministry. So there's a lot in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hadn't seen that
And you
quite
don't,
before.
and I look back at Rahab and her profession, that's not something that obviously anyone would just choose unless they were in a desperate situation. So
Right.
there's her, and then there's Ruth, who is also grieving loss. And I think how God can use those broken situations, even through grief and loss, and I'm sure Rahab experienced that as well to get to the point that she was. It's just really a testament to the fact that in the brokenness, God still shows up, and he's still using those stories to weave out his ultimate redemption for these women, but also to complete his story. That the whole Bible weaves this in and out, where God is just constantly present, even in the midst of suffering. So I don't know. It's fascinating to me, especially when you look at these women and they're Israelite women. And I think when Jesus, calls us to make disciples of all nations, he's not looking at the skin color. He's not looking at the gender. He's not looking at what nationality they are. He's truly meaning all nations. And I think when you look at the genealogy, it just speaks to that, like pretty clearly, that that's what he's doing here. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, so the last story of the four women is Bathsheba, and in the genealogy, she's referred to as Uriah's wife. Her name isn't given.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting choice Matthew's making to not just highlight who Bathsheba is, but to highlight David's biggest failure as the king of Israel. And so if you're more people are familiar with this story than the others, but if you're familiar with the story, Israel's off at war. Bathsheba's husband is off at war, and
as he should be,
and David as king should be as well. But instead,
he's not. Yeah.
He's taking it easy at the palace. He sees Bathsheba. He goes on the roof, sees her bathing on the roof of her home, calls for her to come to his palace. Which Bathsheba there would be grave punishment if she denied the request of the king to come to the palace.
Yeah.
So we don't really get it necessarily if we're just reading it at surface level, but what David's doing is an abuse of his power and an abuse of Bathsheba.
Yeah.
Like it's a very messed up, wrong thing that David's doing in this story. He sleeps with Bathsheba, impregnates her, and then when he finds out she's pregnant, he sends a letter to one of his commanders and tells them to put Bathsheba's husband Uriah at the front lines of the battle they were fighting, which is almost a death sentence. So in a sense, David's having Bathsheba's husband murdered. And yet Bathsheba ends up being the mother of Solomon, who's known as the wisest king in Israel's history, and again is included in the lineage of the Messiah, Jesus. And so I think when you stack all these stories together and you just recognize the oddity that Matthew's not just including women in his genealogy, but he's not choosing the matriarchs of Israel. He's not choosing Sarah or Rebecca or Leah or Rachel, who are like the foundational pillars of Israel.
Yeah.
He's choosing these 4 obscure stories of women throughout the Old Testament that each have just different layers of like injustice and scandal and brokenness and desperate situations. And through all of that, he's showing that God is someone who works on behalf of those who are vulnerable and marginalized and desperate to bring about life.
Yeah. And also those who have rebelled.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw that in Psalm 107 when they, like David, I mean, there was no excuse. I mean, one of the saddest verses in the Bible, I think it's 2 Samuel 11, where it introduces this story, and it opens by saying, in the time when kings go out to war, David was at his palace.
Yeah.
So he had abdicated his role, which sets up him seeing Bathsheba and the whole rest of the story. But there were other things you have to weave. You have to navigate so much in these Old Testament times because David had other wives and other children by other wives. Right. But one of those stories, I don't know if you've seen, there's a new series now called The House of David.
I haven't watched it yet. Have you
seen it?
I haven't seen it yet. Oh.
So I think season 2 just got released in whatever platform it is, but season 1 is on, I think it's YouTube or Amazon Prime.
I think it's on Prime Video.
I think it's worth watching. I mean, like so many of these things, it just puts a lot of color, and they take some liberties with the story. But one of the plot lines in the story is this budding romance between a young David and the daughter of Saul, Michal, or it looks like Michael in the Old Testament, and how there's this sort of romance story, and it's it's a good thing, and so there were honorable marriages and children that came from the hand of God in the life of David that you would expect. Oh, if the line's going to come through anybody in David's family, it's going to be like maybe the daughter of Michal or Abigail, another who came along. But no, it's Bathsheba, who, like you said, not just, yes, it's David's greatest failure, but it's David's greatest sin. It's the one that, the prophet Nathan said, hey, you're the one that's in the wrong here.
And the result of his pride. Because I think the more power he gained, the more liberties he took in abusing that power because he could.
Oh, yeah. And so, God is redeeming, not just those who are in a destitute situation, not of their doing. He's also showing that he has the power to redeem those who put themselves in that. They abuse their power. So from the lowest to the highest, it's all in this genealogy. And I like what you said, too. It foreshadows what Jesus is going to do. Yeah. He's going to keep doing this sort of thing.
And what man intended for evil, God made for good.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think that's where I feel like an encouraging message for all of us, whether we know Jesus or not, to know that the God of the universe does not always work through clean and polished or ideal people, but instead he works through our mess and brokenness to bring about his purpose and his life to a world that desperately needs it. And no matter how much we try and mess up what he's trying to do in the world, he flips that on its head and he brings about good and he brings about life. And we talked about how the genealogy, the story of Israel, and the gospel is all kind of a V-shaped story. It starts off good, nosedives off a cliff, gets really bad, seems like there's no hope, and then gets good again, right? And even in our own stories, when we feel like we're in the pit, we've fallen off the cliff, we're feeling an immense amount of guilt and shame for something we've done or something that's been done to us, God says that's not the end of our story. And he works through it to bring about goodness, to bring about life on the other side. And that's the good news of the death, but not just the death, but the resurrection of Jesus, that he comes out on the other side of death and he can bring us on the other side of not just literal death, but situations that feel like a death, situations that feel like our story's over. he can work through that to bring about life.
Yes,
So I thought it was worthwhile to touch on the
definitely.
women that
Yeah.
Matthew mentions in the genealogy for
Agreed.
that reason. And that they foreshadow Mary's situation in a sense, because Mary becomes pregnant without Joseph being the father, which everyone is going to assume that that's like
Yeah.
a shameful or complicated thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And yet she's the one who gives birth to the Messiah, to
Yeah.
the Son of God. And no matter what other people think about it, like, God was working in even that perceived brokenness to bring about goodness and life into the world. So
Yes.
as we
That-
move into this Advent season, we approach Christmas, I think it's important to have our minds and hearts shaped by these stories and to become more familiar with them as we approach celebrating the birth of Jesus, to understand why that's so significant and why what he came to do matters, and not just mattered back then, but matters for us today.
Yeah. Agreed.
So,
Agree.
and thank you all for being on.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Tina.
Yeah. And we'll see you guys next week.